We're very excited to have you all here today. Such an important topic. So we will get started. I'm going to hand it over to Christy.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I hope that you are having a good day on this Friday Eve. We are going to talk about adopting a strength-based approach. And my slides aren't moving. Okay, here we go. So a strength-based approach, um, sorry, the objectives that we're going to talk about are identifying what a strength-based approach is, core principles of a strength-based approach, identify barriers and solutions to being strength-based, and plan how to bring this approach into your teams and families. So first, we'll start with identifying what a strength-based approach is. Can anybody share what they think about when we say strength-based approach? You can unmute if you want or put it in the chat.
I see a hand.
Yeah, Danny.
Hi. I I feel it's when you have looking at the positives in a difficult or negative situation.
Awesome.
In the chat, we have from Cynthia getting their feedback first. Focus on strengths, more positive.
Great. Thank you.
In chat, we also have focuses on strengths rather than problems or weaknesses. That's great.
Perfect. You guys got it. So, for the purpose of this training, and I think in general, we're going to define the strength-based approach as focusing on positive attributes of a person or group rather than their challenges. So when we talk about the strength-based approach, it helps to look at what the traditional care model looks like in contrast. So with the traditional care model, a lot of times I immediately at least go to like the medical care model. The service provider is considered the expert, and the patient is expected to follow their advice. The service recipient is not necessarily a part of creating the treatment plan. They may take like their symptoms or what they're sharing into account, but they're not actually collaborating. The purpose of the visit is to identify deficits or problems, and the care is generally very standardized. So it's about the same for everybody with little variation. So when we look at the traditional care model, oh, sorry, they're focused on finding and solving problems, and the expert and the patient are not equal. When we move to a strength-based approach, it values partnering with the families or people we're serving, and it identifies existing strengths and builds on them. And when we move to the strength-based approach, it creates empowerment. The families are going to feel capable, and family-driven care is provided. So the strength-based approach asks, when we interact with others, um, when we interact with others, we want to highlight their strengths. One way to identify strengths of others is to ask the curious questions. So some ideas are, how did the family get to where they are? What natural supports does the family have? What does the family feel they do well? And what does the family hope for? And sometimes it's helpful for us to even ask some of these questions before we go in so that we can identify some strengths that they have that, we can go in and start to highlight right away. So now we are going to talk about the core principles of the strength-based approach. So the strength-based approach believes that every person has strengths. The people we work with are not clients. that we are partnering with them. Empowerment leads to positive change. Hope and possibility matter. Cultural identity is a resource and not an obstacle. And in focusing on strengths and not deficits. So let's compare strength-based principles with family peer principles. When we were looking at what a strength-based practice believes, it may have felt familiar. So we can see that there are areas where the strength-based principles overlap with the family peer principles. The strength-based approach views challenges as opportunities for growth, and it aims to build resilience and a sense of control for the client. Two of the principles that the family peer support services state is that it's strength-based and it focuses on outcomes and successes. And then they both also mention that they are respectful and culturally competent, and that the culture identity is a resource, not an obstacle, which I love that that's highlighted. So now that we know the definition of being strength-based for the purpose of this training and the things that it has in common with the peer work that we do, we can look for barriers to implementing it into our work. So barriers to being strength-based are burnout, biases, personal experience, other providers' opinions, documentation. Does anybody have any other barriers that they can think of that might not be listed here?
In the chat, Alfia says, I think it's so important to allow the family to identify their personal strengths because we can see the resilience, but may not feel it in the moment. Maybe families or clients canceling often,
Mm,
burnout, bandwidth caseloads, maybe the family's overwhelmed, language, long wait lists, parents with mental health diagnosis.
awesome. Those are really great.
Yeah, substance abuse, a couple more in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the first thing we're going to look at is burnout. For the purpose of this training, burnout is a state of emotional, mental, and often physical exhaustion brought on by prolonged or repeated stress. And often that is from work, but it can be, any part of our lives. And as a family peer advocate, a lot of times we are balancing a little bit more than the average person with our families and their needs and the needs of our work. Excuse me. So it can be hard to ask ourselves, oops, sorry, I jumped ahead. So burnout can lead to a lack of empathy. It can cause detachment from the people we're working with. It can impair cognitive function. It focuses on efficiency over individual needs, and it can erode effective communication. So, some things you can do to prevent burnout is taking care of yourself, which, uh, I know I always, especially when I was like doing direct care, when somebody would be like, "What are you doing for self-care?" And it was like, Stop asking me that. That's what I need." Um, so, managing your stress, managing a work-life balance, cultivating your social supports, reviewing your well-being to maintain your resilience, and maintaining your mental and physical health. So, I love this little broccoli guy. What do you do to take care of yourself or prevent burnout? And you guys could just unmute if you'd like.
Answers coming in the chat, working out, PTO, leaving work at work, hiking, kickboxing. I saw spending time with friends, travel.
A
A
lot of
lot of
physical
great
things.
answers. Yeah.
Yeah,
Knitting. That's super cool.
that's
I wish I
awesome.
knew how to knit.
Yeah,
I
I
like,
want to start crocheting.
sorry. Someone said, speak with my supervisor and listen to music between meetings. I like that.
That's awesome.
Danny said sometimes it's doing completely nothing. I love that answer because that is so true that sometimes self-care is just not doing anything.
Absolutely.
See, having a good support system, meditation, turning our cell phone off after work,
That's
um, watching a favorite
actually, it's
show or
probably
movie.
tired of me hearing or saying this, but turning off the computer, the cell phone
Mhm.
is so important, I think.
The prayer a couple times, getting hair done, spending time with friends and family. Really great answers. I love how many answers there are. Christy, there's so many coming in the chat, which means seems like everybody's practicing self-care. I love that.
Just amazing. It can
Yeah.
be so hard to do. Something I definitely struggle with.
Utilizing community, that's a new one. That's great. Being active, my faith, and good food. I amen to that.
Alright.
Food. Food is
Yes,
such a good self-care.
I love that. Awesome. I'm so happy to hear that you guys have so many things that you're doing. So the next thing we'll talk about is bias. Um, Bias is a prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared to another, usually in a way that's considered to be unfair. So, it can be hard to ask ourselves about biases that we hold. We may feel shame for having a bias, or that because we care for people in a particular group, it isn't possible for us to have a bias against it. Everybody has biases. It is part of the human experience. Um, some questions that you can use to help check in with yourself are you feeling any biases about the communities around you? Do you have biases maybe about father's ability versus mother's? Do you have a bias with biological caregivers versus youth and foster care? So it's when we talk about biases here, first of all, I just want to say that I think it's important for everybody to remove that shame or that stigma that comes with having a bias. We all have biases. Um, for example, I worked with a family, and the mother and the father were divorced. And the father shared with me very openly that I was communicating more with the mother just sort of naturally. And so I was able to, I was able to sort of look at that, see what I was doing, and I was able to address it in a broader sense. So sometimes our families might point out that we have a bias. And I think it's important to hear what they're saying, be accountable to it, and then, being willing to consider if it's true. So it's important to address where we are with biases on an ongoing basis. And they can shift, right? Based on our experiences, based on maybe what we're facing currently, based on some of the families that we're working with. So addressing the bias on an ongoing basis is important. So you want to check in with yourself. You want to notice maybe preferences and be curious about why. Reflect on generational and societal influences, engage in opportunities to learn about other cultures, engage in resources to check any unknown biases, and just be open to feedback or maybe, how your body's feeling in certain situations. So this is one of my favorite resources. It is from Harvard, and it's an easy, interactive way to check your biases in multiple areas. So we're not going to do this right now, but I wanted to provide you the QR code so that you can get the link to complete it later on your own time. This is something I complete on occasion. I usually choose a couple different, there's a bunch of different like categories or groups. And I just sort of check in with myself. If there's something that maybe I showed a bias to the last time I did it, maybe I'll redo that one and see if I've moved it all. Sometimes I like to choose a group that I don't think I have a bias against. Um, and see where I fall. But it's pretty quick and it is I think a really helpful way, neutral way to sort of check in with yourself. And you don't even have to, share your results or the process with anybody else. So I'll just leave this here for just a second. If you guys want to screenshot it and you will have access to the slides too. So you could do it later as well. Excuse me. If you've ever been in my trainings before, I try to mention this as much as possible. So the next thing we're going to look at as a possible barrier is personal experience. So a personal experience is the sum of all events, emotions, and knowledge an individual acquires throughout their life, which collectively shapes their beliefs, values, and perspectives. So, our experiences can affect how we view possibilities for success. Um, Sometimes we might be in a situation and we have the sudden thought that, I'm being triggered. You feel like a lot of those emotions coming up. Sometimes based on our experiences, we can feel some judgment. I've done this before, like you should be able to do it. It's not a big deal. Um, or how could you let this happen? I think sometimes it's hard to work in some of the systems that we work in, see what youth have experienced, even though, their families might be doing the best that they can with what they've got. Or even feeling like this is impossible. And just, not maybe having a personal experience to lean back on that the situation you're supporting has ever worked out. Um, so these are just some things that our personal experiences can affect. So one way that we can overcome personal experiences being a barrier to being strength-based is self-awareness. So checking in with ourselves to ensure that we're not allowing those personal experiences to cloud how we see people we work with and the experiences that they are personally having. So some things you can do is ask yourself, how does my body feel? Am I feeling tense? I get sort of a heaviness in my chest when I'm anxious. Um, Checking in, am I truly considering their perspective? Or am I thinking about it sort of based on what I have experienced? Connected to that a little bit, am I listening to understand? Do I need to take a break? So I am, and I know if you work in the community, it's not always possible if you're in somebody's home, but I'm a huge fan on, I just have to go to the restroom for a few minutes. I'll be right back. If I need a break and I need to, sort of just take a minute to take a breath or whatever, nobody really questions the need to use the restroom. So, or, maybe if you're in somebody's home and you really just need a minute, oh, I have to run out to my car really quick. I'll be right back. And just allow yourself those few minutes. And then also asking, am I allowing them to lead? So am I using where they're at? Am I meeting them where they're at? Or am I meeting me where I was at when I've experienced this possibly? There any thoughts about any of this?
I have a question.
Yeah.
We just we just mentioned about meeting them where you're at as opposed to comparing it to where you were. How do you handle the situation with the parent who they say they want the support, but you're kind of like it's one of those awkward situations where you're kind of like pulling teeth just to get any type of anything from them.
Um, so one thing, so if it was like for a specific thing, I might use the pack model or the parents as agents of change. And
Okay.
that's on the FTNYS website. So that sort of takes you through steps, and it does actually allow families to say, you know, this is where I think I have a strength, or I do think I can do this, but maybe, they have a different barrier to achieving what they want to achieve. Maybe it's the thoughts of others, or maybe it's some practical obstacles that they haven't even really thought of. So that pack model really helps people to sort of identify what their barriers are. In general, I had so I had a family once that I worked with, and she had a lot of involvement with CPS. And she was very, very hesitant to work with me and to open up with me, which is completely reasonable. So what I did, um, she would always tell me how much meat she had been able to acquire between the times that we talked. So it was really important to her for me to know that she had food in the house. So what I did is I really just leaned in on those things that she was doing well. Um, and for a little bit, I really stepped back and actually just noticed the positive, no matter how small that was. And again, we'll talk about this in a minute, but like this can affect, productivity can be a little bit of a barrier to this, but I shortened the time that we met and I really just focused on her strengths that I saw. And she did start to open up about some of her struggles as I built that rapport with her, and sort of was able to lift her up in the areas that she was succeeding. Does that help?
I think I think so. I just have like I was actually just generally I'm kept on I work on a team and we can take up to a total of 36 cases.
Oh,
I was just taken off this one case, which is very rare. But I said to my supervisor, I said, it's so awkward. I'm asking, like, she says she wants the help and support.
mhm,
Um, but I don't want to like, like the parent or caregiver, they drive the bus and we're just supposed to be there to, empower and support them. I said,
right.
she's not even giving me like it's like you have she's not even giving me like because she's so, I guess, closed off. She's not even giving me anything to work with where it's like I'm just like when I meet with her, it was to the point where I was just asking questions about it was just really like I don't know if anybody else has had those like that really awkward um but it was just really awkward and it kind of made me feel like this is this is not what we're supposed, as an FPA, this is exactly what we're not supposed to be doing. But what do you do when that's really all you have to work with? I don't know if that
Yeah.
kind of makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I really like to do, especially when I sort of get to right to that sort of dead end, is to ask really blatantly, to say, I know that you want to meet with me and I really want to support you. And I'm going to be honest, I have no idea, how I can do that. So like when you think about meeting me, what is your goal? Or, what can I do differently to maybe, make this more productive? But bottom line is you can't work harder than the family is. And even though they want the service, they might not be ready for it.
No, thank you. I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for that question. Amy had agreed with that she has seen that before.
Mhm.
And we have another question if we have time, Christy, in the chat.
Absolutely.
What about when a caregiver is convinced their youth needs to change and that they have nothing to work on, and that is coming from a Alafia?
Caregivers working. Um, and sometimes I just sort of lean into, asking that sort of uncomfortable question. Like, I know that you want Johnny to work in these areas, and I know that so we'll take the strength-based approach. I know that you're so good at A, B, and C. Um, so I'm wondering, my role is to work with you so that you can support Johnny. What, where do you feel like maybe we could, um, do some movement to help you? And a lot of times I think if you like highlight that you want to help the caregiver, so you're not like fixing them or you're not, changing their parenting style, again, really, lifting up those strengths that you're able to see and saying like, I want to lessen a burden for you. So I know that you're so good at making a schedule and getting Johnny up for school every week. I know for me, sometimes I would feel overwhelmed, like if my kids weren't doing chores. Is that something that maybe would help you relax more? So just sort of coming in from a different angle maybe would help. But
Yeah,
again, sometimes people aren't in that space.
thank you so much, Christy. Cynthia also mentioned motivational interviewing skills, and I love that you talked about the pack model. I think that would be super helpful also.
Yeah, both of those tools I feel like have a lot of overlap and I love using them. Answer might be that they're just not there right now, and that's okay. And you say, that's okay. Like, here's the number you call if you decide that you want the service again, and there's no shame in being well. But I do think that, you know, using the strength-based approach, really highlighting the strengths that you see caregivers do allows them to be more open about their needs. Because a lot of times, like most of the time when I faced families or caregivers who were struggling, like, you need to fix my kid, their youth was in residential, and there's a lot of feelings that come with that. So as you build them up, right? And you can say, hey, I can see the strengths and I can see all the great things that you've done for your child and all the potential that you have and all the effort you're putting forth. Even sometimes those are really small things, but just sort of digging around to find some allows them to be vulnerable enough to say, okay, but I need help here. We good to move on, Ash? Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so
Thank you
much.
so much.
Love having conversation and applying it to real world stuff because chances are if you're facing something, somebody else definitely is as well. So the next barrier that we'll talk about is providers and systems. So family peer advocates work in many systems of care and collaborate with many other service providers. So we're going to be talking about those providers you collaborate with for the benefit of the families you serve and the systems you're providing the service you work in as an FPA. So other providers and systems. How other providers show up in the work they do and how effective the systems are can support or be a barrier to the strength-based approach. Um, Other people's burnout can affect our ability to use a strength-based approach. And I think in our field, you're at least working with one other provider, right? Who's burnout or burning out. Um, Sometimes we have other providers who want to be a hero and they actually block the families that we're serving from getting the ability to learn and grow and develop their own hope and skills. Other people's biases Sometimes they can confirm our own, sometimes they can trigger us, and sometimes they can block families from success. When somebody has cynicism and is deficit focused, it can be exhausting trying to use a strength-based approach in your work with them. Can feel like you're almost arguing to a certain extent. And then everybody's favorite, productivity and program requirements. It can feed burnout and it can require us to work in a way that isn't strength focused. So the one family that I mentioned before, where I had to really shorten our visits, that isn't helpful for productivity. But it was something that I talked to my supervisor about and just was really necessary to do in order to grow our relationship. Does anybody have anything or questions or any other comments about this?
I just want to mention, somebody has, Cynthia mentioned earlier, fans as a tool, and I thought that was really great too. Does
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I love using the fans when I'm first meeting with a family because it allows me to ask some questions that might seem invasive if I didn't, have a paper telling me to ask it. So that was one of the ways I like to use that. So how to take care of yourself in the workplace. Focus on what is your responsibility. Um, it can be really, really hard to not do something that you can do and probably maybe do quicker than somebody else. When we're taking other people's, tasks and things like that on, or we're too quick to say yes. It can really actually add to your load and your chances of burnout. You can model, but it's not your job to fix others. So, yes, you want to model the strength-based approach, and that is something that we'll talk about in a little bit, but it's not your job to convince somebody else that they have to be strength-based. That's sort of up to them, their supervisor, and things like that. Use management for support if you're really just struggling, be it, you know, productivity or a program requirement, maybe somebody you're having a hard time collaborating with. Use your supervisor or managers for support to work through those. That's why they're there. Generally, it's helpful. Oops, sorry. It's helpful for them to know that where you're struggling so that they can better support you. Um, Look at challenges as learning opportunities. This is one that I think, as family peer advocates, we're probably naturally, a little bit more skilled in. We've all gone through something that is hard, and in a parenting journey or caregiver journey, which, I think makes it probably a little bit more intense. And we're now using it, right, to help and serve others. So if you can sort of broaden that challenges, yes, they can be hard to go through, but they can also be learning opportunities and even create other opportunities in the future. Say no or give a realistic timeline. So, no, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that. Or, it's not my job. You don't really say that out loud. Or give a realistic time frame. So sometimes somebody might ask me to do something and I say, okay, well, I had this that I had to do by, Friday. Which would you prefer me to do if it's a supervisor asking? Or, what order do you want me to put the priority? And then remembering it isn't your role to save the world. And I think that that's key. I know that's key for me. Somebody asked me once in my life, like, who told you it was your job to save everybody? And I was like, oh, that's right, nobody. So, just remembering that, the the little one of the analogies I love is like when you're meeting with people, you're planting seeds. So, like Danny's example, right? She's met with this family. She's tried really, really hard to get some kind of movement or engagement and she wasn't able to. But what Danny did is she planted seeds. And so we do not get to decide when the seeds are watered, when the sun comes out to, heat the soil, but those seeds are planted. And at some point, probably in those people's lives, the seeds that Danny planted are going to bloom and they're going to benefit the family. We just aren't always around to see it. Any thoughts here?
Can I make a quick comment? Just because
Absolutely.
in the chat we were talking about the fans. They
Ooh,
really it really needs to be. It's so hard to pass it. It's a great tool, but it's really hard, so hard for some people to pass it. And
oh, talk
you're not
about the
supposed
past.
yeah, and you're not supposed to use it unless you pass it. So they really, I just feel like, and it's a conversation that I've had with other FPAs. We have a little coalition on Long Island, and we've spoken about it before. Like, if it was easier to pass, it really could be a great tool. But again, you're not supposed to use it unless you pass it, and it's really, really like.
Yes. I know, yeah. It is
So it's
extremely
kind of
hard.
it's like it's that like between like it's like, well, great tool, but how does it really benefit, and you're doing the training for it, how does it benefit people if you can't use it because you can't pass it because it's, I guess, more the testing is more subjective, I guess.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It is something actually Families Together has paused doing the fans training and is sort of looking at the process to do that. And I don't know this for a fact, but if I had to guess, that's part of what they're looking at. Because everybody struggles with it, like even trainers, right? Like
Yeah.
it is very subjective.
That,
So,
well, that's, I'm honestly, I'm glad you just given that feedback, because that makes, like, it kind of gives us hope, because again, it's a great, it is a great tool, but I don't know, I just, so
mhm,
many people think it's the testing is just a little ridiculous because it's so
yeah,
subjective.
I absolutely agree. And I think most people do. So, yeah, so it is on pause. I'm not part of that process, but I know that they're looking at all parts. So, and I know that they've heard that feedback before. All right. Another barrier possible is documentation. So, documentation is the process of maintaining detailed, accurate, and timely records of a client's case, interactions, and progress. So, documentation focus can feel as though you need to find and highlight deficits to show the need of the service and the progress that the family is making. And so that can sort of conflict with using a strength-based approach. So a documentation guideline that I like to use is that when you're writing your documentation, you should be writing it assuming that the family is going to read like your progress note. Generally they're reading your treatment plan, hopefully. And that what you write could influence other providers' perspectives. So I know a lot of providers who will go and read other service providers' notes before they go and meet with the family. And so what you've written in your notes can have an influence on the provider's sort of perspective of the family, even before they go and meet them. And I always would just ask myself, like, am I okay with the family or reading what I just wrote? And sometimes it might not be what they want to see, but am I okay with them seeing it and it wouldn't be a surprise to them? And then if you're using collaborative documentation, they're already a part of that process, which sort of cuts down on the effort time for you. So, I'm a big fan of reframing things. So I was sort of like, how do I do it? It's something I tend to do, especially at work, sort of automatically. Um, so I recognize, or when you are wow, reframing something, you're recognizing that initial thought or opinion, you're gathering evidence, you're considering alternatives, and then you're developing a new frame or perspective. Um, Something I heard once was, when you're feeling anxious and you're like, oh my gosh, this could happen, and it's negative based. It's like the reframe or the flip side would be like, well, what if it does go well? You know, Something positive could happen as well. And sort of being open to seeing both sides of the coin. So, reframing documentation, I just wrote out a few examples. So, the original statement and documentation might say, the family needs to learn how to parent. And we could change that to the family will increase parenting knowledge. The first is directing a family to do it, using that word needs to. I hate when people say you have to, you need to, like nobody has to do anything. And it also is focusing on a deficit. And the reframe is focusing on the result that we are looking to gain. And that sort of matches the family peer principles that we looked at before, is looking at what is the outcome that we want. The next one is the parent doesn't speak kindly to the youth. And if you reframe it, it could be the parent will learn how to increase positive communication. So again, the first is highlighting the deficits, and it could be seen as a judgment. You know, what is the definition of kindly? And then the reframe is showing the growth that we're looking to build, and it doesn't indicate any judgment. We're not saying that they have a deficit that needs to be built. We're just saying that they're going to increase their ability to use positive communication. The next is the caregiver doesn't understand how a CSE meeting works. So the reframe could be the FPA will provide information and tools to support the parent understanding the CSE process. Um, so the first statement, we're indicating a lack of knowledge or a deficit. And it could potentially, if a family read this, it could add to them feeling, hopeless or like they're lacking information that they should know, right? And then the reframe is focusing on what the FPA can do to support growth in the parent, increasing their knowledge. So again, we're not looking at the deficit, and we're looking at the possible outcome. And then the last one on this is people will think that I'm a good mother. And the reframe could be people may notice how I am a good mother. So the first one is putting that value on other people and their opinions. And the second is identifying a strength, and that maybe people will notice the strength that this person already has. Any thoughts on this? All right. So we're going to practice as a group. Again, you can unmute or you can put it in the chat. Ashley's watching that for me. So we're going to practice reframing. So the original statement is the youth will stop getting into trouble at school.
Maybe a reframe could be the youth will begin exhibiting positive behaviors at school.
Yes, I love that. Anybody else?
The youth will try to make positive choices.
Mm-hmm. About at least 3 for each. Is there one more?
We have one in the chat from Pamela. Youth will improve communication with teachers and peers. Claudia says the youth will try new ways to enhance his or her positive behaviors. Kristen says aim to increase student engagement and focus in class. And Ashley said youth will learn coping strategies to help manage behaviors.
I love those. That's so great. Fun fact, I love doing this. I love rewriting stuff for like progress notes and
Yeah.
training plans. It's weird, I know. So this is fun for me. Yeah, so the point is to highlight a positive action that the youth can take to take care of themselves. So you guys did amazing, and I love that. The next one is the writer explained to the caregiver why they shouldn't yell at their child.
See, we have one in the chat from Shannon. The caregiver will learn utilizing supportive language and tone while speaking with their youth.
All right.
Any other answers for these ones? You can come off mute or put your answer in the chat again. Okay, we have one from Kristen. The writer provides guidance on avoiding the use of yelling as a discipline. Anne said the writer worked with a caregiver to use positive feedback when speaking to the youth. And Amy said we discussed the benefits of using a series of questions or responses while remaining calm.
Love that. So, one thing that you all did is you removed the writer from being the expert, right? If the writer is explaining to somebody, that would indicate that they're the expert and they're like, telling somebody how to do something. Um, and you guys had a reframe that led the caregiver in the ability to change that behavior and what we want to see, not what we're not seeing. So that was great. And then the last one, caregivers won't call any of the resources I provide them.
Cynthia had said, let's sit together and make those calls. That's something she could say. Shannon said the caregiver will reach out to the resources they feel will be supportive for them.
Mhm.
Sorry, they're coming in quick. That's great. Let's see. Claudia says this writer suggested to help open the lines of communication with other providers. Alafia says caregiver may need assistance with accessing resources provided. Let's see. Kristen said, how can we better collaborate with the support network? Chris
Awesome.
said, sorry, I'll read this one more.
Oh, you're great.
Caregiver reported concerns with list of available resources.
That's great.
Mhm.
Yeah, so this statement, and I love that you guys sort of, all caught it. It's very judgmental, right? And it is sort of indicating that the caregiver isn't complying. And we all know caregivers don't have to comply with anything. Um, and many of you highlighted like how the provider could support the caregiver in completing this task. Checking, I liked one person said something about the caregiver calling resources they find helpful. So maybe they're not calling your resources because they don't think that they are going to help them. Um So, you know, and a lot of you sort of identified that maybe there's a barrier to that progress. And so, partnering with the family, maybe even doing with the family, with them with you would be helpful. So, and all of your answers also indicated that the FPA is going to support growth, instead of, highlighting what the parent isn't doing. Awesome. Thank you guys. So the next thing we're going to talk about is planning how to bring this approach to your teams and families. I think learning something, is amazing, but then we have to sort of plan on how to implement it, or if you are implementing it, increasing the scope that you're using it. So actions to being strength-based. Things that you can do to increase being strength-based in the work that you're doing in your your interactions. Practicing the strengths amid challenges. Um, Highlight past successes. Identify potential benefits. Identify what's going well. Identify existing or my goodness, potential support systems, and asking curious questions. Again, if you have ever spoken with me, curious questions are one of my favorite things ever. If you don't know, just ask a curious question.
Christy, Danny had her hand up. Danny, did you have a question or comment you'd like to add?
Yeah, what when talking about like a a goal that would actually positively affect the youth.
Mhm.
However, like for example, it has to do with maybe a change that the parent needs to make, but they're not given the proper like techniques or whatnot on how to actually implement that change. I find that a lot with some of the families, like the parent needs to make a change, but the providers are not, it's like a stumbling block. They're not given, the correct, I guess, guidance, tools, whatever you want to do it in order to, make that change. So it's like it's the block with the providers.
Right. Yeah. Like maybe not one of my favorite examples, I think, if I'm hearing you correctly, is when, maybe a caseworker is emailing a bunch of resources for a parent to call, but the parent's never calling them. And then that care manager or whatever isn't asking, like, do they ever check their email? Do they have a working phone? Do they feel comfortable talking on the phone and that kind of stuff? Is that what you mean?
Um, it was something that was put in the chat before. Like I had a parent that wanted to work on more like I guess better communication and less yelling with the child, and it was put into as a goal on their treatment plan. However, that parent was never provided with, I guess tools on how they can like, things they can do in order to accomplish this goal. And as an FPA, if you don't have that clinical you know what I mean, like we have tools from our own experience and the trainings that we do, but a lot of times the clinicians have more tools than than we do. So I find that I find parents frustrated and that as a barrier.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think, in that situation, if the parent was willing, I would maybe, join the parent in meeting with the clinician and supporting them and communicating, that they're looking for some more tools and some more, like, actionable, information that they can use.
Okay.
And I think, tying it to the strengths-based approach, right? When you're meeting with that clinician, you can support the caregiver in maybe highlighting some ways that the clinician is really supporting the family well. before bringing, what the concern or the additional need is. Anything else? All right. Curious questions can highlight hope. Can you tell me about a day recently where you've had fun as a family? What have you done in the past that helped you get through challenges? What is something you admire about Johnny? Um, I like to this last one. I like to use sometimes a family like when you go, they've had a really hard weekend. Um And it can be helpful sometimes to say, I hear that Johnny was bouncing off the walls. He punched a hole through your drywall. He was swearing at you all weekend, and that is so maddening. Sometimes for me, it helped me to identify something that I liked about my kid to sort of, keep that connection or whatever. Some families wouldn't be open to that in that moment, but it is something that you could try. So keep in mind that how you as a provider speak about families matters. The way that you speak about families will affect the interactions you have. If you are in the office and you are just, you know, sort of like, mom is this and that, and I'm so frustrated, and oh, I don't want to work with her. Um, you are going to maybe not consciously have a little bit of more of an edge when you go and meet with the caregiver. So when you're making negative statements, your words do affect you when you're working with the family. And oftentimes it can also affect other providers' opinions and their interactions with the family as well. So the next thing we're going to talk about is modeling with team members. Um, it's, you know, everybody sort of wants to work in a strength-based environment. And one of the ways to support that happening is modeling it when you are with the people that you're working with. So, highlighting other provider strengths, just sort of saying, hey, Sarah, you are always so good at fill in the blank. Be open to other providers' perspectives, identified shared goals. So maybe you're trying to collaborate with somebody and you guys are, just not seeing eye to eye. Sometimes sort of taking a step back and identifying what is the ultimate goal that we both want to reach can sort of help in that discussion and can put that positive objective sort of at the forefront. Implement collaboration opportunities, such as meeting with the family and providers. Something I think is so important is that all of the providers ideally meet with the family as a group. I know that family peers can often be the ones that are initiating that, or like in Danny's case, saying to the family, it sounds like maybe, they're not completely aware of what you need. Would you be open to you and I going and talking to them and then helping prepare them for that meeting? Um, and then offer feedback that any delays in progress likely aren't
Mhm.
connected to the provider's effort. Usually it's what the family's facing. Um, so what are attributes that you can provide others so that they can grow in trust of you? To have people trust the positive words you say in your strength-based approach, you need to have a trusting, positive relationship. So if you think about somebody that like you don't trust or respect, and imagine them, coming up and being like, oh my gosh, you are so great at coloring in the lines. You probably aren't going to either value that they think you're good at something or even maybe believe that they think that you're good at something. So relationship is really the key to a strength-based approach being effective. Um, so some ways that we can build positive relationships is to be trustworthy, be open to other people's perspectives, be a safe person to share thoughts with, listen to understand, lead by example, teach, don't preach. That's one I really like that. And focus on how others can benefit from suggested changes. Um, you know, sometimes a parent might not understand why you're suggesting something or why another provider is suggesting something, and highlighting that growth or that hopeful outcome that we have can help um, strengthen maybe their willingness to try it. So, creating the ability to see strengths. Ideally, each of us would build an ability to habitually see strengths and potential before we notice people's deficits. Um, I have done this in certain areas, and I think like team meetings, especially when somebody is like, "Oh, this is never going to work," and I'm like, "Well, um, and it, I can see sometimes how it really like lifts the mood. It's definitely a work in progress for me in other areas. So consciously reframing your language, when you say something, you know, be like, oof, maybe I didn't say that the best way. You can re-say it, right? Take two. Um, Identify strengths through reflection and observations. So just sort of taking mental notes. Oh, she's really good at that. If you don't have the opportunity to share it out loud, then just sort of filing it away and maybe you can share it in the future. It would support your relationships. Finding opportunities in situations. So sometimes situations just feel bleak and like they're never going to end. And being able to find the opportunity or the positive attribute in a certain situation can be really helpful. Looking for what is working, sort of along the same lines, emphasizing the possibilities, maybe I should say positive possibilities, and being process focused, right? So we're working towards this end goal, and as long as we keep moving forward, that's a strength. That's, positive. And it might not be as pretty as we want it to be, but we're getting there. I don't know if any of you are Bills fans, but some of those games, right? We got there. It doesn't have to be pretty. Sometimes we get there. Another thing that I think is really important is to um, not devalue a family's experience. So sometimes I think when people are trying to be positive or be strength based, it can sometimes devalue what the person is trying to share, a difficulty. So when somebody shares something with you, you know, like maybe they're sharing that they had a difficult weekend, responding with like, that sounds like it was really hard, but you were able to find a solution. Like you got through the weekend and that's amazing. Instead of like, well, at least you didn't have to take him to the hospital. Which completely, devalues the experience that they're having. Um, Another response, what I'm hearing is that you have some ideas on how to solve this. Um, Instead of, you don't know what to do, so I'm going to tell you, right? Where that is not empowering and it's really putting you in the expert seat. Um, Sometimes reflective listening. So it sounds like you did find a way, some time to take care of yourself. Did I get that right? Um, Instead of, you should have read for an hour. It's easy. I read for an hour this weekend, which again is just very devaluing and is not gonna likely create the relationship where you can be effectively strength-based. Anybody else have any thoughts on this? All right. So now that we have discussed, we've reviewed what the strength-based approach is, how it ties into the work we already do as an FPA, and discuss practical tools to use it. You are ready to put a strength-based approach, um, apply the strength-based approach in your work as an FPA. Or, like I said, if you already are using a strength-based approach, hopefully being able to um, increase your ability or maybe add something new.
Christy, we have a
So,
couple comments.
yeah, great.
Alafia said, the amount of times I've heard, oh, I've been through that and you'll get through it. Sounds
Mm,
nice, but also takes away from the personal experiences and stories.
absolutely.
And then Danny said, this too shall pass. Heard that before. And last, Claudia said, we as FPAs need to validate the family's feelings when they share or open up to us. And then
Hmm.
you got this. That's another one. You got this.
Hmm. You're so strong, you'll be fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that one. The you're so strong. That one gets me.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. All usually well-meaning, but
Yeah. Corinne says we must remember it's not about us.
mhm.
Danny agrees. She doesn't like the you're so strong one. Like it's a choice, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, I would like to see if anyone would be willing to share how they plan to implement something that we discussed today in their work.
I liked what you said about having them say something positive about about their kid, or like an experience they had with their kid that was positive. I have one specific family where mom is really struggling with their son, and a lot of it is like this is his diagnosis and his disability, and it's kind of like it may not improve from here. This may just be who he is, and like coming to acceptance with that, but just like she's in a very negative headspace about it. So I think helping her just look at the positives and like just kind of reframe her own mind, I think will be really good for her.
Absolutely. Good.
Maybe being more mindful of my thoughts before I go to like a family's house. I work remote, so I'm not in the office talking about them, but there are times that certain families just kind of are overwhelming at the time, or you're feeling stressed out because they won't do any of the things that you're helping with. And I know I'll get in my head of like, I gotta go there, but so I think maybe trying to have a little more positive influence on myself as I'm going there, maybe that'll help.
Yeah. Well, and I don't like we don't want to gaslight ourselves, but I do think that, sort of similar, right, to maybe just saying like, okay, I want to identify two strengths that this family has before I meet with them because I'm feeling frustrated. Um, can definitely help sort of our approach.
We have a lot of answers in the chat that really like the reframing. Um, And then Anne said, our program emphasis the strength-based approach, and the training has renewed my awareness. A lot of
Awesome.
people like the reframing, yeah. Meeting with all providers, with the family as a group.
And I know some providers like will start off those team meetings with like say one positive attribute that you appreciate about the youth. Or you could, broaden it to one positive attribute about the family so that everybody's sort of starting on that same strength-based foot.
Yeah. So, I'm real big on self-care for family peer advocates, and the importance of it. I'm glad you touched on that. And I like how you mentioned, not working harder than the family, that we need to teach families how to be strength-based so that they're doing some of that work too. Just to kind of prevent that burnout. I really like how you mentioned that.
Yeah. I mean, if you're burnt out, to be strength-based is so hard.
Yeah, for sure.
You're sort of hanging on by a thread at that point. So that
Yeah.
self-care is so important.
Yeah. Oh, I like Vanessa said, can't get frustrated. Happen to remember you're planting a seed, a thought. I really like that, planting a seed.
Yeah, that has gotten me
Mhm.
through some moments with families, especially when I really felt like the service could help them and they just weren't there.
Mhm.
I was like, okay, I left some seeds behind and like I'm not gonna get to see them, but they're there and hopefully they'll bloom at some point in their life and it'll benefit them. So that's definitely been useful to me.
Yeah, and Pamela mentioned more listening and reflective questioning and working to avoid the at least you didn't or those at least
Yeah,
questions, which at least you're not here or at least this didn't happen. So yeah, that's a really good point, Pamela. Thank you.
absolutely. Yeah, I was raised with those at least.
Mm-hmm.
At least you're not a child starving in Africa, like, thanks, mom. So, as we wrap up, and if anybody has like any questions or comments, please feel free to ask them. We have a few minutes left. So if you have something that you just want to sort of brainstorm on, um, I'm more than willing to do that as well. This, QR code is takes you to the Families Together Workforce Development. I'm sorry, it does not. It takes you to the Families Together link tree. And we are on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Spotify. We have a podcast now. I will admit I have not looked us up on TikTok yet, so maybe I'll do that after today. Um, but we actually have somebody who has been hired to do those, um, sort of those social media platforms, and he is very entertaining. So I'm sure whatever he's creating is fantastic. Does anybody have any questions? And you can, this says chat, but you can unmute as well.
Did I hear you correctly in saying that FAMS training is currently on hold right now for an indefinite amount of time?
For an amount of time that I am not aware of.
Okay,
Yes. I
thanks.
have been told that there will be like an email push to anybody who's on any of our email account, like email, I'm trying to think of the word. Like anybody who signed up for emails from Families Together would get a notification when it's being offered again.
We do have a survey in the chat. We would greatly appreciate it if you could take a few moments to complete this survey. Um, Tell us what you liked, tell us how we can improve, maybe some future topics. That would be very helpful for us to improve our webinars in the future. We want to thank you, Christy, so much for the great information. Thank you, everyone in the chat and who joined us for the great conversation. I think it's an amazing topic. And, you know, like Christy said, we will be here for a few more minutes if you have any questions, comments, anything like that. But again, we want to thank you, Christy, for the information and thank you for joining us. And we hope to see you again in the future.